Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the geometry, just ensure again that everything is zeroed out. Got to translate Y 10 degrees there. Other than that, it should be zeroed. If I were to zero out the hips, then it would just come down to 0, 0, 0. So I do want this Y value here. Okay, so I'm going to select the joints, and then let's select the skin. And now I'm going to go to the bind skin, and that's going to be under rigging, skin, bind skin, and I'll also be using paint skin weights. Okay, so I'm going to click on bind skin, and I'm going to go to edit and reset the settings. This is true of any dialog box that comes up with the edit on it. So I'm going to go with the default settings. There are a lot of different settings that you can use in painting weights. I'm somewhat old school when it comes to that. For me, it's just tried and true methods. So I'm going to show you just like the default old school method for now. And we'll get into some of the more advanced weighting down the road. Now, when it comes to maximum of influences, what that's referring to is the amount of, so each vertice can have a weight of 1, and that weight can be distributed across multiple joints, and that's what that's referring to. So I'm going to limit the amount of influences that a vertice can be influenced by to just 2. I think 5 is excessive, and I know in older game engines a joint was limited, or pardon me, a vertice was limited by the amount of joints that it could be influenced by. So I think it's a good idea to be at 2, and often I'll even do 1. But let's go ahead and do 2. Click on apply. And so now my mesh turns magenta, and that means that, so if I select a joint, that the mesh is influenced by it. So if I select the shoulder, you can see now that the joint's following the skeleton. Now what I'm going to do is hit the 5 key so I can go into shaded mode, and I'm going to click on my paint skin weights tool. And for this, I can just collapse the outliner there. And so this is my menu for painting skin weights. I've got the skeletons in a hierarchy. I can lock skin weights. These are some tools that we'll get into later. The mode that I'm going to stay in is paint. I'm not going to get into these. I'd recommend not using advanced options until you got this first method I'm going to show you working well. So select a geometry. So then if I come up and just select, say, the hips, for instance, or the left collar, the left shoulder, where it's white, that means that that's the influence, how much weight each vertice is applied there. And if it's black, that means that there's no influence. Now I could go down here to use a color ramp, and so the highest influence would be the orange, then the red, or here I can use a different color preset, sort of rainbow. I prefer just to stay in black and white. It's easier for me. But that's something that you can, that's your choice. Now the biggest things we're going to be worried about are values and opacity. So if it comes to opacity, if I turn this way down, what I can do is go to the shoulder joint, and it's best if you use a stylus for this, but it's not 100% necessary. Now I had touch enabled on my tablet, and it made my so right now I'm just touching it with my hands, and so it can kind of set this out of whack there. So I'm going to go under View, just click on Default View, which is going to set me back so that my view isn't twisted. So I think what I'm going to do is turn the touch off, as I'm using a Cintiq here. All right, so if I hover over the joint, the geometry, got the left shoulder. So if I turn opacity up, then it's going to paint these values in. Pretty strongly. Now, if I turn the opacity down, then I'm going to have to do more strokes to make to add influences there. So I generally keep a like a low opacity. That's going to change on whether or not I'm just using the mouse or a tablet. If I'm using the mouse, I'm going to probably keep it a little lower, because with the tablet I can control it with how much pressure I push on. So notice that I had my value at 1. Okay? So if I'm painting with a value of 1, that means that I'm just adding 1 here. Now, I'm just adding influences rather. Now, if I turn this value down to 0, then I'm taking away influences. Now, when I'm using this mode, I rarely do that, because here's the problem with setting that to 0. For instance, if I go to this left shoulder, set these to 0, that means that I'm taking the influence away, but I don't know where these influences are being moved to. So as I go through here and select, like for instance, the collar, so I was on the shoulder, and I removed the influences here with a value of 0. I don't necessarily know where those influences are going to go, and I just saw here that, well, that looks like these influences went to the collar. And that's clearly not what I want. So what I'm suggesting to you, or what I'm strongly recommending, is keep your value at 1 and always paint in an additive fashion. So for instance, on the left shoulder here, I'm only going to add. And then if I want to put stuff in the collar, well, again, I'm just going to add, and I'm not going to take away. Taking away meaning a value of 0. If you take away, you don't know where those values are going. So in my opinion, the easiest way to do this is just always keep this value at 1, and you want to use an additive method, not a reductive method.